From Public Radio International, I'm Christopher Lydon. This is Open Source. When you read in the paper that President Bush hears pretty regularly from God, who tells him, George, go and fight these terrorists in Afghanistan, and George, go and end the tyranny in Iraq, or go get the Palestinians their state and get the Israelis their security, you have to ask yourself, where do we earthlings, we Americans, we 21st centurions, get our names and images of God and our convictions about his or her personality? Harold Bloom of Yale, the legendary reader and teacher of teachers of literature, grew up on the Hebrew God Yahweh, and though not a believer exactly, he won't settle for less than the contradictory, all too human Yahweh who saved and berated and punished his people. But speak for your own God. Is he a warrior, a healer, a mighty counselor, a marriage counselor? Does he more resemble the enigmatic, ambiguous Jesus of Nazareth or Mel Gibson's tortured, exalted Jesus the Christ? The names of God are next on Open Source. I'm Christopher Lydon. This is Open Source, the radio show that's fused at the brainstem with internet energy. Focused this hour on the names of God, betokening the personalities attributed to the Lord of the universe. Is yours a child or a king? An avenger or the Prince of Peace? And by the way, how did you learn your answer? We are inspired in this inquiry by, intellectually speaking, a higher authority. Harold Bloom of Yale is the insatiable and lightning-fast reader of everything, the Shakespeare man and keeper of the Western canon, who remembers every word and reference as surely as Google does. In his new book, titled Jesus and Yahweh, Harold Bloom is searching his own head and a vast literature of theology and history on the names divine, William Blake's phrase, and he's inviting us to search with him. Please join the conversation at 877-673-6767, or jump onto the website with a comment at radioopensource.org. Harold Bloom, welcome. An hour won't be long enough, so let's jump into this American moment. George Bush's God, the American Jesus. Where are we?
I think we are in a very bad way indeed. These days, I keep thinking back to that very bad great man, Huey Long, as you know, absolute dictator of the now afflicted state of Louisiana from, I think, about 1927 until his assassination around 1935 or so. The Kingfish, as he called himself. He was at once senator from Louisiana and governor, and he once said magnificently, of course we will have fascism in America, but we will call it democracy.
What about theocracy in America?
Well, we are now, I would say, our democracy is 1/3 a plutocracy, 1/3 an oligarchy, and 1/3 a very rapidly and frighteningly burgeoning theocracy.
How did we get there, roughly speaking, in your view?
We've been on the road to this for a long time now. I think the American religion, as I like to call it, was invented in 1801 in the Great Cane Ridge Revival on the borders of Kentucky and Tennessee, where tens of thousands of people came together in a kind of ecstatic spilling over in which all the denominations fused together into what calls itself to this day American Christianity, but which has nothing in common with European Christianity or historical Christianity or theological Christianity or Middle Eastern Christianity.
Well, you and I have talked about this before, and Emerson is the kind of founder, the intellectual patriarch of the American religion. That's another argument. I want to know how we got to the moment where you, in this very provocative book, could write this about the American God. You say, though even most Christian scholars finally regard Jesus as Jewish, and clearly he was Jewish, he is now American. He is multi-everything. An American Jesus. How did we come to this, other than the power of our own media?
Back around 15 years ago, I was working on a book called The American Religion, which I'm going to republish in February with some new stuff in it. I went around, particularly the South and the Southwest, talking to people about what their view of Jesus was. I was staggered by encountering, I think in the end, literally more than 1,000 people, each of whom was having daily conversations with Jesus, and they were at least as sane as I was.
What were they saying, and what was Jesus responding?
He was telling them that he loved each one of them on a personal and individual basis.
On an exclusive basis, or on a species basis, on a political basis, or an American basis? I mean,
they managed, I think, to politicize it even then, though it did not gather its true force. Look, in the end, what's happening now is that the Civil War has been reversed. The South and the Southwest have gone Republican, but this is, in fact, the South's revenge on us, and the South has finally won the Civil War. And that means that since the South was always much more intensely Christian than in those days the North was, or the East was, then a historical revenge is being exacted.
People speak of the red states as the extended Confederacy. That's a political matter. I want to stick with the religious question. How did the Jesus of those conversations become, this, I'm drawing a little bit on Bill McKibben's argument in Harper's, but so unloving, so unchristian, if I may, so
the Jesus
personal.
Of George W. Bush clearly has widened the needle's eye so that the rich riding their camels can ride through very easily, and the poor...
In their SUVs, I think, now.
And whatever, and the poor are nowhere to be seen. What you have now is Jesus Christ CEO. You have, as George W. Bush tells us, his favorite philosopher, who is Jesus Christ.
Changed my heart.
Yeah, he walked on the beach, actually, with no less a person than the Reverend Billy Graham, summoned there by his papa, and the Reverend Billy converted him right there up in Maine. A very important moment in all of our lives, hélas.
Well, these are presumptuous questions, but I just have to ask it. I mean, what is Jesus to George Bush other than the fellow who told him to stop drinking and enforced it?
I myself like to say these days that the one really great argument for intelligent design is George W. Bush himself.
Explain that.
I mean that for such a person, so mindless, so semi-literate, so absolutely convinced of his own sanctimonious righteousness, for such a person to have been not elected twice, since he wasn't elected the first time, as we know, they simply stole it. And who knows how much of Ohio and Florida they stole the second time, we're still not sure. But still, evidently 3 million more Americans preferred him to the fellow from this state. How that could have happened continues to stun me. But I still remember I went to bed early that night, and my friends kept calling and saying, but there are 3 million more voters, and I said they're all going to prove to be evangelicals, and alas, I was right.
I want to get away from the politics and back to the God question. Where does, well, maybe my question really is, why hasn't he been corrected, even by the Christian churches, by Bible readers, Christians in my own church, on this matter of what Jesus means, who Jesus
There are
was?
a lot of people out there in the United States who regard themselves as Christians, who have no use for the Christian right, and are increasingly furious at George W. Bush and his, shall we say, abduction of the American Jesus. But the point, I suppose, about the American Jesus, and indeed about the universal Jesus, is that he is all things to all men and all women. You cannot pin him down, particularly the American Jesus.
Our phone is 877-673-6767. Harold Bloom, the Yale legend, is our guest. His new book is called Jesus and Yahweh, The Names, 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 names These are not a recognizable father and son